Please feel free to join my Discord server to send video requests, chill, and just chat about various different topics. Link is in the description down below, and if you're watching this late, don't worry, I made sure it can't expire. Hope to see you all there. Hello everyone, this is Daikaiju SpaceZilla approaching you, and welcome to a brand new episode of Toho Kaiju Marathon. Today we discuss the first movie to a franchise that's been a long time coming to this show, Godzilla from 1954. If you don't know I'm a massive fan of Godzilla, you're either 1, stupid as hell, or 2, wait, there is no other answer, you're just a fucking retard. In 1933, RKO took the world by storm with the first ever blockbuster to be invented, King Kong. This giant monster classic would spawn a whole new genre of media that would come to inspire countless filmmakers. Jump 20 years later, another monster movie was to be released with stop-motion effects called The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Same year, war veteran Ishiro Honda, Tomoyuki Tanaka, and Haruo Nakajima would be involved with a film called Eagle of the Pacific, which was made as an attempt to compete with these Hollywood action movies. Toho would come to realize these three made a great team and eventually would hire them again in later works. Honda, after experiencing the horrors of war, would take the key elements from King Kong and The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms as a way to make his own monster movie to show the effects the nuclear bomb and war in general has on not only the civilians, but the people involved. A new member named Eiji Tsuburaya would come to join this crew to craft the special effects for the movie. Tsuburaya was also fond of the Big Ape, so much he got into the business himself. In fact, the original plan for Gojira was to be stop-motion effects, but they'd come to realize that would take longer than preferred to accomplish. Thus, a new technique would be invented called suitmation. For the record, if you're one of those stupid peasants who likes to go, a man in a rubber suit stepping on toy cars, your family hates you, you're gonna die alone, you have zero purpose in this world, and everyone's gonna fucking laugh when you're gone, you stupid, worthless cunt. The film would turn out to be a worldwide success, earning the reputation of one of the best films ever made, and actually had Japanese folks crying in the theater due to the deep themes behind Gojira. Due to its success, it would spawn loads of sequels and remakes/reboots, becoming currently the longest running film series out there. And though King Kong was pretty much the granddaddy of the kaiju genre, Gojira would be the father of kaiju media, actually shaping the genre into what it is. So after Gojira's release, filmmakers around the world started making their own take on the genre. However, Godzilla's impact inspired more than just kaiju films. George Lucas would even find himself inspired by it, particularly Eiji Tsuburaya's work on the special effects. Yeah, I bet you feel like a real jackass now. Godzilla begins when 17 vessels mysteriously blow up and sink on the nearby Odo Island. Professor Kyohei Yamane, his daughter Emiko Yamane, and Hideo Ogata head to the island to investigate. Soon they witness a giant monster the locals call Gojira destroying the area. Meanwhile, Emiko meets her boyfriend, a secluded scientist named Serizawa. He makes her promise to keep a secret about his research. When she agrees, he reveals a lethal weapon he developed called the Oxygen Destroyer. Soon after, Gojira's presence threatens Tokyo and other Japanese cities. The army and navy find they aren't capable to stop it, so Emiko breaks her promise and discloses Serizawa's weapon to her lover, Ogata. Now they gotta try to convince Serizawa to use the weapon to stop Godzilla's rampage. Gojira isn't this fast-moving popcorn flick like the original King Kong. But that's because despite having some of Kong's key elements present, it tells a much more dark and depressing story about the evils of nuclear energy and war as a whole. So I guess this would qualify more as a slow burner, but that is not a bad thing. In fact, it's done so well here, I can never really complain about Godzilla's lack of screen time since I was so invested in everything going on around him. So if you're one of those fans, and I say fans loosely because you're more like a Neanderthal, this shows you lack any real understanding for the series, and I wonder why you even watch these movies in full when you might as well just look up the destruction scenes. I don't know, this misconception always irked me because there's so much more to these films than just big monsters fighting. It's no secret that Godzilla's overall theme is anti-war of any kind. The film does not make an attempt to hide it, but it's done in a way where it doesn't feel like they're forcing it down your throat. The explicit handling of the scenario is simply used as a tool to spike fear and extreme emotions to remind the world the effect it has on not only the citizens in the middle of it, but also the scientists dragged in for their research. The movie wants you to hear everything it has to say and sugarcoats absolutely nothing. Though there is monster movies prior to Godzilla that used the nuclear bomb as a reason for mutation or awakening, Gojira was the first to make it such a huge focus on the plot and use this gigantic force of nature as a device to show the evils of it by personifying the weapon. It really makes a lot of sense that Honda was a veteran in war, witnessing all the dark stuff revolving around it. Because the way it's represented is severely realistic, no wonder the Japanese audience back in the day cried through the movie.
Even nearly 70 years later, Gojira is still by far the most serious and meaningful of the 36 Godzilla films that have come since, with only Shin Gojira from 2016 coming the closest. Fitting, since both films have the goal of providing social commentary on nuclear-oriented disasters with a specific impact on Japan and its culture. I'm hardly the first to mention this, but just like Cloverfield, 2008, is an allegory for America's experience of September 11th, 2001, so too is Gojira for Japan's cultural trauma from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, especially the former.
This right here is textbook definition of a story filled with emotional weight. Each individual has their own personal struggles going on around Godzilla's havoc. We've got Dr. Daisuke Serizawa, based on none other than the creator of the atomic bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, played by the iconic Akihiko Hirata. He is a rather tragic scientist using his research to create something productive that would benefit society in some way, but accidentally created a dangerous weapon that could be used for war like the H-bomb. Similar to his real-life counterpart, Serizawa faced major regret and self-hate after creating such a powerful war tool, hence refusing to reveal his creation to the public eye. He lost his eye in war and witnessed the damage nukes did to Japan, so it's natural he'd grow to stand against it now as a scientist and would remain difficult to budge even on serious situations like a giant radioactive monster destroying Japan. But eventually, Serizawa comes to the realization without his discovery, Godzilla will only continue to bring loads of suffering towards the world, so he finds a solution to prevent that while assuring his oxygen destroyer won't become a new toy for the government. I will not spoil it in case you have yet to see this masterpiece, but if you haven't yet seen Godzilla, you really need to sit the fuck down and rethink your life, cause that shit is like water mixed with oxygen and sprinkled with cocaine. You know, the necessaries in life. It's hard-hitting and developed his character to a great level. Took the appropriate amount of conflict to make this decision, but like a reasonable human being should, he realized something needed to be done even if it requires doing a completely selfless act. Akihiko Hirata's breathtaking in this role. He just brings so much to an already well-written character, you might even find yourself with watering eyes watching his world fall apart. Like, if you read a novelization, you'd still feel lots of sympathy for this tragic hero, but he wouldn't be as effective without Hirata's top-tier levels of emotion. Emiko Yamane, played by Momoko Kochi, being a young girl who's an emotional wreck because she's forced to put up with so much complicated situations. She's expected to marry a childhood friend that she's always looked up to as a brother, but doesn't know how to approach it to avoid heartbreak, and when she does, he gives her a secret that he only trusted her with, which makes it even harder. To put even more weight on poor Emiko's shoulders, his weapon is the only thing that could possibly stop this god of destruction. So she ends up stuck in a hard place because on one hand, the oxygen destroyer is really all they have to stop Godzilla, but on the other, letting everyone know will break Serizawa's trust and put his life at risk. But after seeing the countless deaths of families and their grieving loved ones firsthand, Emiko starts to feel guilty and in the end makes the right decision, even if what she chooses is far from easy. What we have here is a very emotional lady that's got a lot of problems revolving around her life. Momoko Koji knocks it out of the park in this scenario and has me intrigued to check out more stuff starring her. A moment that really sticks out to me is when her and Ogata go to convince Serizawa to use the oxygen destroyer. The way they stare at each other for that few seconds with no dialogue necessary conveyed more than enough. You saw the disappointment in Serizawa's face, feeling like he's been betrayed, while looking at Emiko's there was obviously a sense of guilt for what she'd just done, even though it was really the only way.
あなたとのお約束を破りました。そして何もかも尾形さんにお話しいたしました。どうかあれを使わせてください。ごめんなさい。許してください。
Hideo Ogata, played by franchise veteran Akira Takarada's got a heartfelt romance with Emiko involving a nice little love triangle to spice up an already drama-driven story. However, he's wanting to approach it in the most respectful way he can, rather than just going right in out of respect for Serizawa and Emiko's pops. Despite his mostly kind nature, he isn't nice to an over-the-top extent. He's written and performed in a way of realism and can't lose his cool when it relates to a serious case scenario. Dr. Kyohei Yamane, played by Takashi Shimura, likes Serizawa as a scientist, but his motives and struggles are those of his own, as he's the character that actually sympathizes with Godzilla. Yes, Godzilla has caused nothing but trouble, leading to the suffering of countless people, similar to how the bomb did. But Yamane's perspective is dived into so well, you see where he's coming from. He feels that rather than killing the beast, we should find some other solution and study him, because even considering what Godzilla done, there is good potential in all living beings, thus deserving some sort of chance. It does offer some good emotional conflict as nobody shares his viewpoint, so as much as he'd like to see Godzilla survive, the chances of it happening aren't looking good. Takashi Shimura, being one of the finest actors of his era, was never below superb. He puts so much heart into his performance, it's about enough to put you in a trance, making it difficult to see him as just a fictional character.
The acting from our cast is where a lot of the drama in the film gains its weight. Since the story itself had technically been done, more or less, by America in the year previously with The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, the uniquely somber tone each of our characters gives to the film is an important contribution in setting it apart. Hands down, the biggest contribution to this effect is Akiko Hirata as Dr. Daisuke Serizawa, a brooding, eye-patch-wearing man set apart from the rest of his Japanese homeland not only for his brilliance, but his apparent fascination with European culture and oddball reclusiveness. Ultimately, it is his being set apart from the rest of humanity that primes him to be the fated savior of the world, which he accomplishes with his own superweapon, the oxygen destroyer, whose devastating secret he carries with him to the grave. As a scientific counterpart, Dr. Yamane, equally played to memorable effect by Takashi Shimura, has become an inspirational staple for the rest of the franchise, fascinated by Godzilla himself, yet all too aware of the consequences such a creature's existence would, and does, have on the world. The two characters were essentially meshed together in the recent MonsterVerse films with Ken Watanabe's Ashore Serizawa. Last, but certainly not least, are Akira Takarada and Momoko Koji as Ogata and Emiko, whose somewhat scandalous love affair at the expense of Emiko's arranged marriage to Serizawa is an understated part of the film, but a nevertheless critical one, as it further demonstrates Serizawa's isolation from the rest of humanity, but also inspires his compassion and self-sacrifice, a final test for him to be the bigger man, in spite of all the world's shortcomings.
The suspense is so good, dare I say it surpassed Kong's. You have all these ambiguous events that occur, which leads to people assuming it's a more natural cause like a typhoon, and Godzilla being nothing more than just a superstition thought up by the natives. Other ways that the suspense was great was using faraway shots of Godzilla in order to give the audience a glimpse of what he looks like before he fully reveals himself. This making Godzilla's arrival all the more impactful. Speaking of the King of the Monsters, it's no surprise how iconic he became. Cause dear lord, this film makes one hell of an introduction. His design being loosely based on a Tyrannosaurus Rex and a Stegosaurus, but is designed cleverly to be his own unique monster. I really like the detail of Godzilla having similar skin to the victims of Hiroshima. It adds more depth to the theme, and it makes sense for a godlike creature who was spawned from that weapon to have. He makes for a perfect interpretation for what I'd imagine the atomic bomb personified would be like. He's dark, relentless, and that cold blank stare he's got going for him is plain haunting, as it feels like he's staring right through your soul, with a menacing roar being the cherry on top of this overall terrifying Sunday.
もう退治することもありません。我々の命もどうなるか、ますます近づいてまいりました。いよいよ最後です。右手を塔にかけました。ものすごい力です。いよいよ最後。さようなら皆さん。さようなら。
Of course, he is brought to life by 3 special effects techniques as a whole: suitmation, puppeteer work, and a few shots of stop motion. I'm not saying the special effects haven't aged. It's from 1954, so that's kinda inevitable. But the cinematography is so good. There's moments where Godzilla looks like an actual monster that risen from the ocean, which surprisingly hold up great. Now, most of the time, it looks like a film from 1954, but you can't fault it for being a product of its time, let alone being what created suitmation. But Eiji Tsuburuya's work here is never less than breathtaking. There's so much they were able to do to push the boundaries of what they were capable of in the 1950s, and using 3 different techniques was a clever idea. I won't deny the switch between the suit and the puppet could be strange for some modern day audiences, but for certain shots it was necessary and they made it match as much as they possibly could. Not to mention, quite a fair share of angles with the puppet were pretty damn impressive. The miniatures are fucking astounding, having all kinds of details that seriously are not expected, especially from a fucking 50s kaiju movie, not even with a Hollywood budget at that. One thing that really caught my attention is the little people added on Godzilla's attack. It looks ridiculously realistic, and I wonder how they even done it like that. I figure it's a green screen effect of some sorts, but Godzilla blends in so well with them you wouldn't know its age. I'm gonna assume it would probably show more if a colorized version ever gets released, and no, that piss-colored abomination from Italy doesn't fucking count, and you should consider suicide for bringing it up. Excuse me. But even then, you gotta hand it to him for executing that little detail to perfection, even if being a black and white film does give it some advantage in terms of aging.
What a debut for the King of the Monsters. Much like the story and its dramatic content, Godzilla himself has rarely ever been this ominous and nigh invincible, especially as it pertains to a country that is still in some ways crippled. Yes, his powers and size have increased over the decades since, but again, as it pertains to the state of Japan at the time of the film's release, Godzilla is at the peak of his presence as a character, and any increase in size or abilities would have been overkill and overshadowed what was important about this film as a whole. The facial design for the suit may look derpy at certain angles as seen in photos now, as does his hand puppet close-ups, but when viewed from others, the glaring visage of an angry god comes across in spades. If the viewer is not swept away by the film's tone and the integrity that it brings, the effects won't win them over, as they are and always have been an acquired taste, yet still absolutely impressive given this film, like King Kong before it, was the first of its kind and a landmark of cinema history. The action here isn't frequent, but what is present is the inspiration to all that has come since. Gojira is most interested in making sure that its dead serious approach to the material will succeed in getting the point across, and indeed, while the effects will admittedly be a hard sell to your average Joe, not that they necessarily matter, the fact that this film is still one of the few in the franchise that can legitimately be called a quote-unquote horror movie is what will determine whether its viewers will forgive any shortcomings with the effects. And one would be hard-pressed to say that the aftermath of Godzilla's rampage in Tokyo doesn't accurately depict what is an all-too-real form of horror.
Akira Ifukube's score is honestly the best of its time and set a whole new bar for musical work in cinema. Some of the tracks create an absolute feeling of dread that puts a shiver down my spine even during the King's rampage. Usually Godzilla's attacks are exciting in his movies. Not to say they aren't here, but you're more frightened of him than anything. And when the more upbeat action-packed music comes into play is when the army starts having an advantage in some way. Of course, this is also a depressing movie filled with drama and personal struggles throughout the story, so it's to be expected that it'll have music to complement this aspect as well. To say the least, Ifukube delivers as always. Similar to the horror-themed music, it's chilling, but for a different reason. It's the type of tracks to make a tear-jerking scene even more powerful than it originally would be. However, there isn't always music playing in Gojira. Sometimes everything is completely quiet, which can be done right, but it also can be executed poorly if used too much or is present on a scene that would require some form of sound to back it up. Gojira, on the other hand, uses it in the right doses where it provides a gritty atmosphere to aspects that would benefit from it. Gojira shows that sometimes silence is golden, but doesn't overstay its welcome to the point it loses all effect and just ends up becoming boring.
Akira Ifukube fine-tuned the Godzilla theme as it is most well known in later entries like King Kong vs. Godzilla and especially Mothra vs. Godzilla. But the Godzilla march that came to be when making this film is an undeniable complementary track that completes the Godzilla musical experience. We can also thank Akira for creating the Godzilla roar, proving that all elements of sound design are essential. To further illustrate the almost once-in-a-lifetime effect these two films seem to have in the franchise as a whole, Shin Gojira is the only other film to use the unsettling music of Godzilla emerging from Tokyo Bay, particularly when he evolves for the first time.
Alright, I think I made it pretty clear that I hold this film at a very, very high standard. But rightfully so, because Gojira not only spawned to be what in my opinion is the all-time greatest franchise, but everything about it is revolutionary, and there's no wonder why it had such a massive impact on media worldwide. It's not even close to being a movie that you watch to feel good, though. It takes itself incredibly seriously, and everything about it is dark. It doesn't even end happily, it's bittersweet at most. But it's not made to be dumb popcorn entertainment, nor is a good chunk of the later entries. You watch Gojira to get a deep, dark take on the giant monster genre, and it ended up leaving off where King Kong did by spawning a whole new take on this style of film. This movie is high art, and if you've yet to watch it, go and fix that now. It's pretty widely available. You can even view it on HBO Max with its American altered version King of the Monsters. With that being said, I'm gonna award Gojira a fantastic 10 out of 10 stars.
The legacy and reputation of the film in question is undeniable, as it has spawned the longest-running film series of all time. That being said, I will honestly admit that Gojira is not what I think of first when the big guy's name gets mentioned, much to the chagrin of film snobs who seem to be standing the movie too hard these days. It is much more likely for me to think of one of the many Showa sequels or even the Heisei and Millennium films that strike a better balance in tone, simply because they give me what I want from Godzilla, escapism. The comments of these snobs coming at the expense of these later films, casting a shadow on Gojira, but only if you let them. Gojira is simply too dead-on accurate to a rather dark time in the world's history for it to be a repeat viewing for me outside of being in a certain mood. But without it, I wouldn't have my more preferable evolutions from further down the road, so I would be an absolute madman to give it anything less than an 8 out of 10. A masterpiece now and always.
With Gojira's huge success in its home country, producer Joseph E. Levine would acquire the rights to Godzilla to bring it to the United States. But audience members around the time wasn't very familiar with Japanese entertainment, so rather than doing a typical translation, what we got here is an American altered version starring Raymond Burr to appeal to a wider demographic called Godzilla King of the Monsters. And it worked, because it got people around the globe more intrigued in Japanese material and served a big part in spreading Godzilla's legacy. In fact, this was the only version officially available overseas until the original got its full release in 2004. This would not only lead to later entries trying out this tactic, but other pieces of Japanese media would also receive this treatment, including Gamera, Rodan, and Varan. But after this trend with Kaiju would die down, it would later make its way to the superhero genre in the 90s and a bit with the 2000s, with Hyper Agent Gridman getting Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, Kamen Rider Black RX and Zeto getting Max Riders, Kamen Rider Ryuki got Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, and Juko Beef Fighter from the Metal Hero series got Beetleborgs. And as much as it fucking rapes my soul, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers being the American equivalent to Super Sentai.
Up, Power Geek!
Oh god, that gave me AIDS! Journalist Steve Martin is en route to Cairo for an assignment, but he stops at Tokyo for a personal visit with his college friend Dr. Serizawa. While there, the local media begins to report on strange happenings at sea, with ships being destroyed and entire crews being lost. Steve decides to investigate and travels to a remote Japanese island where he encounters a gigantic prehistoric beast dubbed Godzilla, which has apparently been awakened by H-bomb testing. Godzilla soon appears in Tokyo Harbor, but several attempts to destroy it fail and the city ends up in a blaze. The only remaining hope is a new weapon that may be more destructive than Godzilla himself. The story is pretty much the same as the Japanese version, just with some key points replaced and the anti-war theme watered down to Americanize it. I do not have a problem with this. It's the same movie made with a different culture's flavor to spice up this Japanese piece of sushi. Though this does separate it from what came before, but still leaving a lot of what's necessary intact to create an intriguing experience. But I do take issue with some things here. It's cool to replace plot points to leave room for another culture's interpretation, but I feel like they cut too much of it down. A lot of the parts that were originally very emotional aren't really as much so in this Americanized edit, because it doesn't give the important plot points enough time to breathe, and really it should have been longer than the Japanese version rather than shorter. I understand what they were going for with King of the Monsters was more traditional Western monster flick, hence having a bigger focus on the noir than drama, but some of what was in Gojira is still present here and just comes off as half-baked. Speaking of the noir, the handling of the narration was clever and made what would normally seem like laughable exposition work, because what Burr's doing here isn't treating us like we're dumb. He's a reporter and he's doing his voice recordings about his experience and a juicy story for his job.
King of the Monsters from 1956 is an oddity among the usual cases of basic dubbing from so many foreign film imports. In bringing Gojira to America, it was decided to give the American audience a relatable focus point. So Perry Mason himself, Raymond Burr, was enlisted, and what a fine and most importantly respectful addition he is, giving what was already a potent docudrama a taste of noir thriller mystery.
Steve Martin's a decent protagonist. He's not complex like Serizawa or most of the cast from the 54 version, but he doesn't need to be. He provides a different perspective, and Raymond Burr's stoic performance often gives me the chills as he narrates Godzilla's destruction.
George, the tanks have been wiped out by a wall of flames. Neither man nor his machines are able to stop this creature.
His friendship with Serizawa, though not having the most screen time in the world, was convincing, and being Daisuke's longtime buddy, it adds some decent emotion that he would be the one to have Ogata and Emiko talk Serizawa into using his weapon. Officer Tomo, played by Frank Iwanaga, sadly doesn't have much characterization. His only purpose I could really think of is he translates the Japanese-speaking parts to Steve. But aside from that, he's more shallow than the Arctic Ocean. He's not useless, but without a doubt underdeveloped. Frank Iwanaga does provide enough for what he's given, though. Those are really the only new characters for the American edit that's worth going into, since the rest are hardly even on enough to qualify as characters. But there is a few new actions I'd like to say my piece on, and the dub acting for the OG characters that I normally wouldn't discuss on my show. But since this is a part of the American version, I need to discuss it. Dr. Serizawa in Ogata is actually voiced by none other than James Hong. Which if that name rings a bell, it's because he was David Lo Pan in Big Trouble in Little China, Mr. Ping from Kung Fu Panda, Hannibal Chu in Blade Runner, and Uncle Po from Sleeping Dogs. Now don't get your hopes up. Even though he is a very good actor, this has gotta be the weakest performance I've seen James Hong deliver. I don't know if it's because he wasn't anything special in the 50s, or the director was a stupid pissant and thought it would be a good idea to just do one shot just for the sake of it being a dub. I'm not a dub guy myself, so generally when it comes to this topic, words can't describe the fuck I do not give. But this isn't just made for mentally retarded kids, alright? This is another version of the movie. Thus, more effort is necessary. James Hong isn't terrible though. I was surprised how he had the ability to portray two different characters and both felt totally different from the other. Then there's Sami Tong as Dr. Yamane, which again wasn't anything mind-blowing and lacks the emotion the original actor gave the character. But there's enough there to make him a serviceable choice. My biggest problem would have to be Emiko Yamane. I do not know who dubbed her in English because nobody seems to credit her no matter what source I checked. Which leaves me wondering if they just hired some skank they found at the street corner, but that's none of my business. However, the voice actress isn't my only problem with the use of Emiko in King of the Monsters. There is other flaws involving this character. For example, I don't like how Emiko revealed Serizawa's secret in this one. I don't know if it's the voice actress, but she doesn't seem to have any guilt about it, and she literally went up to Steve Martin like she wasn't gonna say what Serizawa's secret was. But my question from this is, why did she even bring up the weapon could kill Godzilla if she wasn't planning to snitch him out? It didn't take any pushing to make her tell it either. He just has to say how Godzilla fucked up Tokyo and she told him everything with no issue.
But SpaceZilla, she didn't need any convincing in the Japanese version either.
This is different, because in Gojira, she saw all the people in pain and agony from Godzilla's wrath and felt trapped like a rock in a hard place. But she did the right thing and told with her own will, regardless how much it hurt. In King of the Monsters, she doesn't seem distraught about it, and she literally brought up, I got a secret that could kill Godzilla, but fuck all these people, I made a promise. And then proceeds to break the promise without any real effort, killing any emotional impact it was intending to carry. Since we're on the topic of dubbing, it would probably be a good time to discuss another critique I have with King of the Monsters. The changes of voice and the quality of the performances can be a bit jarring. Yeah, it's cool some moments from the original are still in Japanese, it gives you a break from the dub and it keeps some of the greatness from Godzilla still intact with the new stuff. But there's scenes where a character would say the name of another in Japanese, but would quickly switch to the English voiceover.
I couldn't tell Dr. Serizawa about it.
It wasn't clever, and as underwhelming as the voice actors were for the characters, they might as well just let them do everything in the English-speaking parts not narrated by Raymond Burr.
Though it has caused more than a few unintentional laughs in naming Burr's character Steve Martin, folks should remember that Steve Martin, the actor and comedian, was only 11 years old at this point and obviously not famous. That bit of detached mockery from viewers aside, Burr takes the material completely seriously, which is something he also did for the American version of the Heisei era's The Return of Godzilla in 1985. The only other noteworthy addition is Frank Iwanaga as Security Officer Tomo, who provides a Japanese contact point for relaying events to Steve. The dubbing here for the original Japanese actors isn't near as bad as some later examples, but it still is an unfortunate detractor should one dwell on it.
Soundtrack is mainly, if not 100% the same from Godzilla, but why we're still gonna dissect it into King of the Monsters segment is how it's used on the new scenes. They didn't add anything new, but frankly, they had no reason to. What was made for Godzilla was already top of the line, and trying to compete with Ifukube's work would lead to anything new more than likely being overshadowed. Luckily, Ifukube's score still feels right at home on the newly shot scenes, so the chances of someone who's not watched Godzilla being able to tell each piece belongs to a completely different version of the movie are slim.
Ifukube's themes are left intact, seeing as how Henry Saperstein hadn't yet come along to be critical of Akira's iconic military marches. One particular piece of Akira's music is focused on, and it is the aforementioned bit where Godzilla rises from the bay. Here it is used to accompany the new scenes where Marin lies among the rubble of devastated Tokyo.
Alright, Godzilla King of the Monsters doesn't even come close to holding a candle to the high piece of art its Japanese counterpart was, but it's arguably just as important for introducing Godzilla to a Western audience and being the only version of the film officially available overseas till the early 2000s. I certainly don't find myself turning this version of the film on nearly as much as I do with the OG, but every once in a great while, the mood does hit for the American altered one. I recommend watching it at least once in your life, but make sure you watch Godzilla prior. It'll leave a better impression and a better understanding of what Godzilla is. So with that being said, I'm gonna give Godzilla King of the Monsters a solid 6 out of 10 stars.
While the original Gojira has definitely gained well-deserved acclaim in the years since it was made available outside of Japan in 2004, the 1956 King of the Monsters edit is the version that brought Godzilla his status, whether fully appreciated or not, as the icon of cinema that he is today, arguably being the most well-known version of the film and an added force in the impact of the IP, with the subtitle of King of the Monsters and Burr's reporter character being inseparable parts of the franchise's legacy. As I am often to do, I concur with scholar David Callett when he said Burr's narration adds and improves certain moments, stating that Burr's speeches here are chilling and memorable, with him further praising how the narration renders Martin impotent, as not even the American hero can save the day this time. If that doesn't simultaneously work as a commentary on America's efforts to put the genie back in the bottle, said genie being nuclear power, I don't know what does. King of the Monsters gets another 8 out of 10 for me, equally important to the legacy of Godzilla as Gojira was.
Sorry I couldn't get this episode out sooner. I wanted to have it up before Godzilla vs Kong, but some bullshit occurred with my phone which made me have to reset the damn thing, which made me lose almost all progress on this review with the exception of a few notes, and got me locked out of both my Gmails to the point I had to contact a friend to retrieve them because she's good with hacking. And then life decided to throw some other bullshit my way. But you know what? Better late than never, plus the GVK hype train is still alive and well, and Singular Point's a thing. So it's a perfect time for celebration. Speaking of Godzilla vs Kong, it did not disappoint, and if you have not yet watched it, you need to fix that now. It's still available in theaters. In fact, I'll be viewing it for the first time in a theater tonight in the time of this recording, and the Blu-ray and 4K are currently up for pre-order, so feel free to check those out. Anyway, I'd like to give a very special thanks to my good friend Trevor Thomson for joining me today. Please check out his YouTube channel. He's got a few videos up, and they are pretty damn good if I'd say so myself. Also go check him out on Fictosphere. Links are in the description down below, along with my social media accounts and alternatives, which you should also check out. And if you like this video, please hit that like button, share it around, subscribe, and smash that bell for notifications to keep up to date on all my future content. This is Daikaiju SpaceZilla, leaving the building.